Like I lecture in my classes on human sexuality about Alfred Kinsey. Okay,
Yep.
one of my heroes, just because you want to talk about going against the grain, about like really ruffling feathers, from the biographies that I read and his own writings, but I never got the sense that he fully acknowledged that a lot of the work that he was doing, like he portrayed it as I'm doing this to help other people. Through my experience, I've seen all these people who are doing what we know statistically are not that is not that uncommon. That why are we penalizing or criminalizing or shaming behavior that so many people are doing? And it always seemed that he was looking at other people rather than trying to come to terms or being honest with saying, like, trying to come to terms with who he was and why he was. I mean, did you get that sense as well that he was kind of like focusing more on others than himself? Because you're telling me very clearly this was part of your own self-exploration. Like this was an offshoot of your own self-exploration. Like, do you think that Kinsey had that insight or honesty?
I don't really know. I mean, to me, he's an historical character. I, of course, never met him, and he's become so mythologized that it's really. I'm kind of skeptical about many of the different stories that I hear about him and what motivated him. Okay. I also hesitate to overstate his influence. I think he's known so widely now, not because he was first, he wasn't. Not right. Because what he did was correct, it wasn't. But he was the authority when the baby boomers were young and just starting to ask questions. He was the first American post-war authority in it, even though all of the pre-war intellectuals who had been studying sexuality in meaningfully scientific ways for generations were destroyed. So it was really just, I think, a fluke of what was going on in the world at that time that have, made him quite the celebrity that he was. So, which is not to take away from what he did. He was a pioneer in several different ways. But if the scientific parts didn't, really add up, I just think that we pay a bit more attention to him because of how people were able to use what he represented to their particular political movement of the time.
Okay, and when you say the science doesn't have, and I talk a lot about the sampling and, right. Right, is that what you're referring mostly to, is the extremely biased sampling and the way he collected his data, or is there something...
Well, now, to be fair to him, he was using the only scientific method he was familiar with, which was collect as many specimens. He was an entomologist. He collected insects, and he collected as many different insects as he could in order to get an idea of the diversity among them. So that's exactly what he did with humans. There was no attempt to make it a representative sample any more than entomologists of that day attempted to collect, diverse samples of, their populations. So he just did it, and so people referred to the famous statistic, and probably one of the things that made him most known was that it has been ascribed to him that 10% of people are gay, 10% of men are gay.
Right.
He never said any such thing. The book never said any such thing. Right. It was some activist was talking to the media. The activist was a he and wanted to, make it sound dramatic and simple and something that would work well in the media. So it just came up with a number. Kinsey never said it.
Right.
It's just attributed to Kinsey. And if somebody contests something that, has a political tinge to it, one doesn't want people, in an attempt to be polite, hesitate to correct the fact in case they get mistaken for not agreeing with the underlying politic. And that's how we got that myth. So as I say, it's granted, his work had the import of the time that it did, but it's the myth statement that he has attained is, I think, really a product of the time and how things were attributed to him than anything he actually accomplished as a scientist.
Like you talk about the 10% or the magic 10, which is funny because I've asked this to literally thousands and thousands of students, because when I was young, I mean, just full disclosure, my mother opened up Lovecraft, so Canada's first sex store in 1972.
Excellent.
Right, so I was exposed to a lot of information which I thought was common knowledge. And to me, since I was a little child, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, for some reason, I assumed that everybody on the planet knew the magic number 10. And I asked my classes every single term, young, old, gay, straight, anything in between. Not that many people know that number. When I say what is the presumed number, I mean, has it fallen out of favor? Is it just something that's not as widespread? Was I just biased in my beliefs? Like I really thought that the Magic 10 was just so widespread, especially among, let's say, the LGBTQ, etc. So is that not something that's being promoted widely?
Oh, it was used widely, for generations.
Yeah. So.
I don't know how easy it would catch on amongst the educated today when it's so much easier to check. I mean, it's not like many people are going to run to the library, or if they happen to have a copy of the Kinsey Institute's, find the page, go through
Right.
it's actually several different tables, and it just looks like tables and tables and tables. One of these has got to say 10%.
Right.
So, I mean, it was at a time when, and again, I'm openly gay, have been for many years, and I am able to say that only because of the contributions and the activists of the generation before me. However, I'm also a scientist, and if there's a factoid which isn't right, there's a factoid which isn't right. And this one was an effective media play at the time, again, which I, very self-consciously have ultimately benefited from. But as a scientific fact, it just never held up. It was a myth of the time. Now, I dislike doing that kind of thing. Again, even though this one was for my benefit, if I permit it, then I am no longer allowed to correct when somebody who politically disagrees with me does it.
Right.
Luckily, they do it way, 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 way more. But on this one, the meaningful estimates using a representative and stratified sampling is generally between 2 and 3% are, live, their lives as gay.
Right.
Bisexuality is a fascinating and other misunderstood question, which is also, highly influenced by what activists want people to think, and what people, want to sound either fashionable or hip or open-minded, and therefore just reflexively endorse and kind of let their critical thinking go a bit. But that's a conversation unto itself.
Right, which I had actually with J. Michael Bailey a little while back.
Okay. Yes, he knows it better than I do. And so if you had a conversation with him, there is nothing I could possibly add.
And this is why it's such a great pleasure to me, because I've lectured on the work that you've done, that J. Michael Bailey has done, that others have done, right? And so to be able to have the person actually, in their own words, convey things, I feel much more comfortable, to be able to ask the questions directly, see your perspective,
Sure.
Right? Because I don't want to misrepresent.
Sure.
People talk about the Magic 10, but to me, the better number if you want to really talk about a provocative number, was the 37% of men that he said had a same-sex sexual experience to orgasm. The part that drove me crazy, and I don't know if you've read about this or what you think about this, because I tell my students, I say, look, I'm into critical thinking. I'm into being open and honest. I'd rather people hear the truth, or as close to the truth as we can get. If there are mistakes, there are mistakes. But when you misrepresent things, I always am worried about the backlash. Like once people find out that something's presented incorrectly, they go black and white. They suddenly just dismiss everything. They don't want to hear any more of it. Versus saying, okay, one particular person or one theory came out. It could be wrong, but let's not let that deter us from investigating further, because we still need to know. So the one thing that I believe it was Gebhard, who took over the Institute after Kinsey's passing, I believe he wrote, I can't remember if it was a book, a paper, but I have it somewhere, the quote where he said, there's been all this criticism about the sampling. It wasn't a representative sample. There were too many prisoners, too many, men solicited in gay bars to participate. And then he said we reran the stats, took out all the problematic data, and he said we still got the same numbers, including, the controversial 37%. When you hear something like that, as a scientist yourself, what do you make of that? I mean, I know no other studies have come close, and you're saying you take out all the problematic sampling and data and still get 37% or close to that?
Oh, again, the sampling was one of the big problems, and it's one of the clearest problems, but there were several others. For example, Kinsey did not use consistent is the word. Yeah, he didn't use a very specific definition of sexual orientation. He collapsed into one variable, sexual attraction, which is really the definition of who's gay versus straight. But he mixed into that sexual behavior, which
Right.
includes, teenagers or kids just doing stupid little sex play things.
Right.
If there was some, passing nothing, which was not at all sexually motivated, then the writer easily could have given such a person a 1 or 2. So because he collapsed attractions behavior, and so on, it's not really clear what it was that he was measuring. It's, the people who really were gay probably, did come out the Kinsey 6s or 5s because,
Right.
Lots of gay men either experimented with women or tried to force themselves into heterosexual roles,
Right.
and of course, even these days until their 40s and 50s, never mind, in the days when Kinsey did it.
Right.
So when he says 37%, can I believe that 37% of, teen or preteen kids had some kind of silly group wank? Of course I can. Frat boys, military, and so, of course.
Right.
So 37%? Okay. Do I think that's really a measurement of how many people I'm going to see out at the bars? No, that's nonsense.
Right.
So I just don't think it's a meaningful number, and by the standards of really any survey, any meaningful survey methodology, it just wouldn't hold up. And this isn't to say that was Kinsey right or wrong, and if he's wrong, then what? There have been a dozen other studies since then, and they keep getting the same number. Roughly 2-3%, over and over and over and over and over and over using the correct sampling. So again, from my point of view, why is it exactly we still are talking about Kinsey at all? I mean, every time we have a conversation about brain surgery or whatever new technique is going to allow us to remove some tumor, we don't start with Galen and start with, well, what about this lump theory? We stick to what the current science is, and it's been shown time after time after time. You don't go back to the first original one because somebody happens to have heard of it.
Right. Okay.
Or at least that's why I conclude that people really discuss it, because it's just the one that was known among the baby boomers when they were young, and that's been the predominant part of the culture for, these generations.